All diesel engines under the hood of the Volvo XC60 are of our own production. Basically, 5-cylinder diesel engines with a displacement of 2.0 and 2.4 liters were installed on this crossover. In fact, their design is 90% identical. The most powerful version produces 230 horsepower. This version appeared in 2015. All Volvo diesel engines have a timing belt drive. The timing belt needs to be renewed every 90,000 kilometers. In principle, Volvo diesel engines are very good. True, their reputation in 2007 to 2010 was spoiled by a defective hydraulic alternator belt tensioner. It was his fault that the belt broke or jumped off, often falling under the plastic timing case. There he was pulled under a toothed belt. It all ended with the belt jumping or even breaking, followed by the death of the motor. As part of the recall campaign, the hydraulic tensioner was replaced with a mechanical tensioner. The XC60 was largely unaffected by this issue. But you still need to keep an eye on the alternator belt, and it is better to change it every 5 years and buy a really high-quality belt. Let's go through the entire variety of modifications of Volvo's inline diesel 5s. By the way, the letter designations of the engines on the XC60 cause a lot of confusion. There are models with the designations 2.4D, and others with the indices D3, D4, D5. These indices indicate the power range. For example, the Volvo XC60 D3 can have either a 2-liter 136 horsepower engine or a 2.4-liter 163 horsepower engine. Version D5 is from 205 to 230 horsepower. Literally in the first year of production, the Volvo XC60 was equipped with a modification of the diesel engine borrowed from the Volvo XC90 D5244T5 and D5244T4. These engines produce 163 and 185 horsepower. These engines have swirl flaps, 30,777,650 in the intake manifold. This unit and its traction, 31,216,460, lasts 80,000 to 100,000 kilometers, then wears out. If the damper drive rod slips, the engine begins to suffocate, it smokes heavily, does not pull, and an error appears for this mechanism, P2015. The original pull will cost $11, but the valves themselves will have to be changed when oil begins to ooze from under their axis. Fogging appears above the generator. Less often, the dampers jam or even break off. But since the valves themselves are plastic, they do not cause serious harm to the pistons and valves between which they can get caught. The dampers cost $185, and to replace them you need to remove both the intake manifold and the injectors. In general, it is a troublesome and expensive operation, but it has to be carried out only on 2 specific modifications of the 5-cylinder turbodiesel available on the earliest XC60. On other versions of the Swedish turbodiesel there are no swirl flaps at all. However, once every 100,000 kilometers, it would not be superfluous to remove the intake manifold to clean it from a layer of oil and soot deposits. With a mileage of more than 250,000 kilometers, a Swedish turbodiesel can start to run loudly. In most cases, the noise is caused by dirty hydraulic compensators. They will have to be changed. If you continue to operate the clattering motor, some hydraulic compensators may jam, and then their rockers will fall to their sides. As a result, both the camshafts and the cylinder head will be damaged. Original Volvo hydraulic compensators cost $62, and there are 20 of them. Good substitutes cost $14. To avoid contamination of hydraulic compensators, you need to change the engine oil every 10,000 kilometers. Clattering hydraulic compensators cannot be cured by any flushing or incantations. Let's talk about the turbochargers of these engines. There is nothing to talk about problems with them, they serve well, but their health depends on the quality of the oil service. The 2 earliest modifications, 2.4D and D5, were equipped with Garrett turbochargers and had an electromechanical geometry drive. Then the electric drive disappeared completely. On the D3 versions with a real displacement of 2.0 and 2.4 liters, one turbocharger with a vacuum actuator and its position sensor is installed. On modifications D4, 181, 190 horsepower D5244T12, D5244T14, D5244T21, and on the new D5, 205 to 230 horsepower D5244T10, D5244T11, D5244T20, D5244T21, D5244T23. 2 turbochargers are installed. Neither of them have a controlled geometry or a wastegate. Only the low-pressure compressor has a bypass. And between the hot halves there is a damper with a vacuum actuator. It switches the flow of gases between the turbines. By and large, there is no need to be afraid of the twin-turbo diesel Volvo XC60, but in order not to suddenly damage the engine, it is necessary to clean the cooling radiators at least once every 2 years. The fact is that cases of cylinder head gasket puncture have become more frequent. Most likely this is due to overheating, and also with the crooked chip tuning of these diesel engines. A broken cylinder head gasket is indicated by gas bubbles in the expansion tank of the cooling system. Petrol versions of the Volvo XC60 are much less common. From the very beginning of sales, the Swedish crossover could be purchased with an inline turbo 6, 285, 304, 329 horsepower B6304T2, B6304T4, B6304T3. These modifications to the T6 are rare, but the engine is very reliable, although expensive to maintain. The timing chain is located on the transmission side. The chain lasts about 300,000 kilometers, but you will have to remove its cover much earlier to replace the gasket to eliminate oil leakage from under it. An oil leak may appear from under the vacuum pump, but this repair with replacement of the vacuum seals will cost much less. It is also periodically necessary to eliminate the whistling of air that passes through a crack in the oil trap membrane. An original oil trap will cost $300, $31,319,643. Although nothing prevents you from replacing a burst membrane, there is a replacement on sale for $9. With a mileage of more than 200,000 kilometers, the pump may leak, replacing which will also require a lot of standard hours. The 3.2-liter gasoline engine on the Volvo XC60, B6324S, B6324S5 238, 243 horsepower, is a naturally aspirated engine, the brother of a 6-cylinder turbo engine. This is a very reliable engine. However, a metallic whistle may appear on it, and even on the turbo engine. It is produced by a worn-out bearing in a special gearbox from which the generator is driven. Another turbo engine of Swedish origin is the inline 5, 249, 254 horsepower V5254T12. Surprisingly, this old but very reliable engine only appeared in the XC60 for the 2015 model year. This engine has no weak points. We have a full review of this unit. When purchasing and operating, monitor the performance of the crankcase ventilation system, and make sure that there are no oil leaks under the plastic timing belt cover. And if you still have to change the camshaft seals, then you need to pay attention to the presence of wear on the phase shifters. The 4-cylinder turbo engines under the hood of the Volvo XC60 are gloomy. In 2010 to 2013, a 2-liter Ford EcoBoost, 203, 241 horsepower, B4204T6, B4204T7, was installed on this crossover. An extremely unsuccessful engine, dying due to scuffing and destruction of the pistons. In 2013, another 4-cylinder 2-liter turbo engine came to the engine range, this time of Swedish origin, 245, 306 horsepower B4204T9, B4204T11, B4204T15, paired with an 8-speed engine. Automatic transmission. But this motor was not famous for the problem-free nature of its ancestors. From birth he is an unforgivable oil glutton. He consumes 300 to 400 grams of oil for every 10,000 kilometers. The Volvo XC60 was equipped with 3 different automatic transmissions. The 6-speed engine works with the most common diesel engines, as well as with reliable 5- and 6-cylinder turbo engines. Automatic Aisin TF80SC. A very successful transmission that lasts more than 300,000 kilometers. Just change the ATF in it every 60,000 kilometers, and everything will be fine. If suddenly, in the summer heat, this automatic transmission begins to kick and jostle when switching to drive or reverse, then go to a service center for special adaptation. Paired with Volvo 4-cylinder petrol engines and a rare new 4-cylinder turbo diesel of our own production, an 8-speed engine works. Automatic Aisin TG81SC. This transmission has proven itself to be excellent so far. With the miserable Ford turbo engines, there is no alternative robotic transmission MPS6, also known as Getrag 6 DCT 450. It needs to change the oil and filter every 40,000 kilometers because clutches collect dust directly into the oil. You also need to check the tightness of the front transmission cover. If it fogs up with oil, then you will have to spend $300 on this part, because then the cost of repairs will increase several times. It's not uncommon to hear a hum from under the hood of a Volvo XC60 with a mileage of more than 200,000 kilometers, and you have to put more effort into turning the steering wheel. Everything indicates that the power steering pump is worn out. In general, in order to extend its life, once every 10 years or after a run of 150,000 kilometers, it is worth replacing the power steering reservoir with a completely new one. It contains a filter mesh that becomes tightly clogged. The original tank will cost $75. There are cheap substitutes. Also sold at half the price is a tank from Land Rover Freelander 000578. On pre-restyling Volvo XC60, the air conditioning compressor is rather weak. It fails with a crunch, having served about 200,000 kilometers. Almost all versions of the Volvo XC60 are equipped with all-wheel drive. The bevel gear serves very well here. The front universal joint should be refilled with new grease from time to time. This should be done at least every 40,000 kilometers. Close to the front universal joint there is an exhaust manifold, the heat of which fries the lubricant. When it dries, the splines wear out, which will eventually result in the replacement of the entire drive shaft. The cardan is suspended on two bearings. With a mileage of about 200,000 kilometers, one of the bearings may hum. To replace it, you will have to contact a special service for repairing cardan shafts, because to replace the bearing, you need to select a suitable one and temporarily remove the cross. There are no offers for driveshaft bearings for the XC60 at all. The all-wheel drive on Volvo XC60 crossovers is based on an electro-hydraulic Haldex-type clutch with a multi-plate clutch, which connects the cardan drive to the drive gear of the rear gearbox to transmit torque to the rear axle. The first units of the Volvo XC60 are equipped with the 4th generation Haldex clutch. It needs to be serviced. Once every 80,000 kilometers, change the transmission oil, 31,325,136, and the filter, 31,325,173, along with its cover. The original oil and filter together will cost $200. There is oil from good manufacturers, and there are also non-original filters, but they say that Haldex may not work correctly with them. Since October 2013 on versions D4 and since April 2014 on versions D5, T5, T6. The drive to the rear axle is connected to the 5th generation Haldex coupling. It does not have a separate oil filter, and the clutch itself has become more capricious. However, you can get rid of all its vagaries if you change the oil in it every 50,000 kilometers. When changing the oil, you need to remove the electric pump and pan, and then wash everything thoroughly. Where products are deposited inside the coupling and tightly clog the filter mesh on the electric pump. If the electric pump can no longer create normal oil pressure, then the performance of the clutch decreases. In addition, when cornering there are bumps and jerks, as if someone is grabbing the car by the rear wheels. Simply changing the oil regularly and flushing the Haldex coupling will protect against these problems for a long time. With high mileage in both generations of couplings, the pump electric motors fail. New original pumps for Haldex couplings of the 4th, 31,256,757, and 5th generations, 31,367,750, will cost $700. But there are non-original repair kits on sale, HR 31,256,757 and HR 31,367,750, in the form of a pair of carbon brushes and a commutator, which do not last indefinitely. And related parts. In general, some craftsmen have mastered repairing electric motors of Haldex coupling pumps. The rear gearbox of the Volvo XC60 is rather weak. The bearings in it wear out, after which the gearbox begins to hum. Some workshops offer overhaul of gearboxes, but in general you will have to buy a used one. Experts say that it is worth filling the gearbox with non-original synthetic gear oil, because the original mineral water thickens in the cold, which leads to wear of the bearings. The Volvo XC60 has McPherson strut suspension at the front. The original lower control arms are sold as a whole. Their ball joints last at least 100,000 kilometers. The original lever assembly will cost $220, but you can buy a non-original ball joint separately and bolt it on. The rear silent block is also sold separately as a non-original. Front shock absorbers last 10 to 12 years, but on pre-restyling cars they had to be removed much earlier due to the creaking of the support bearings, which are poorly protected from road dirt and moisture. Original support bearings, 31,277,826, cost $90. A good non-original one is several times cheaper. Experts advise thoroughly filling the support bearings with grease, because there is very little of it there. Front stabilizer struts cost $100, non-original ones, of course, are 10 times cheaper. But the original struts are capable of traveling more than 100,000 kilometers. The bushings for both stabilizers are detailed separately. The steering rack serves well. Most likely it will last more than 200,000 kilometers. The Volvo XC60 was equipped with adaptive shock absorbers of the 4C system. They last a surprisingly long time, up to 200,000 kilometers, but the cost is no less surprising, $700 a piece. In the rear suspension of the Volvo XC60, the front silent blocks, 31,476,221, of the trailing arms require replacement every 5 years. Silent blocks are sold separately. The original will cost $85. Good substitutes are 3 times cheaper. Along with them, the shortest rear suspension arms will be asked to be replaced. The price of each is $170. Non-original manufacturers offer both levers and their silent blocks. Rear shock absorbers last at least 150,000 kilometers and usually just start leaking. Passive shock absorbers cost $250. Self-adjusting Nivomat shock absorbers are twice as expensive. By the way, sometimes, in order to save money, owners abandon adaptive shock absorbers and install regular ones. It was noticed that on the Volvo XC60 of the first years of production, i.e. 2008 to 2010, according to documents, the windshield glue was applied poorly. Therefore, after several years of operation and still on these machines, water leaks occur in the area of the sensors behind the mirror or near the upper corners of the glass. You'll have to go to a workshop and re-glue the windshield. Volvo XC60 door locks are equipped with electromechanical servo drives. Their weak point is electric motors. Moreover, the motors in the rear doors may fail earlier than in the driver's door. In this case, the door will not open or its lock will not lock. New locks cost $500, but you can restore their functionality for many years by replacing motors that are sold in China. Workshops offer such repairs. You can replace the motors yourself if you are not afraid of the difficulties of disassembling the door and the lock itself. Sometimes locks stop working because the wires in the outside handles have broken. They break off near the connectors, so unfortunately, it is not always possible to restore the wiring. In this case, you will have to buy a used handle with working wires, paint it in the desired color and install it instead of the old one. The side mirrors of the Volvo XC60 with electrically driven housings may surprise you in that when unfolded, they turn to too large an angle, literally turning forward. The problem here is the same as with BMW mirrors. The stopper is dirty and soured. On a Volvo, you need to disassemble the trim around the mirror housing hinge, clean the hinge and its stopper, and add lubricant. But if the mirrors stop folding and unfolding, then you need to repair the wiring in them. The tailgate servo drives on the restyled Volvo XC60 do not last forever. Over time, they begin to creak during operation, and then they simply stop working. They will have to be replaced with new ones, $500 a piece. On pre-restyling XC60s, the rear door servo mechanism is installed on the left, and a conventional gas lift is installed on the right. A single servo drive for a Dora style costs $330.